They say blood is thicker than water, but the people sharing your DNA often hold the sharpest knives. They stole the man I loved and the empire I spent 7 years building. My own sister laughed in my face, expecting me to drown in humiliation. But they forgot one rule. You push a betrayed woman to the absolute edge. She does not beg. She climbs back up, carrying enough hellfire to burn them all to the ground. Hello, dear listeners of Violet Revenge Stories. We are so grateful for your continued support and presence here today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget needed to keep our operations running. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our dedicated staff to cover their living expenses and continue creating these thrilling stories for you. You can help by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the video description or comments. My name is Avery Morris. I am 34 years old, and for the past 7 years, I poured every ounce of my soul, sweat, and sanity into Vanguard Crest architecture. Building a firm in the fiercely competitive landscape of Austin, Texas, is not for the faint of heart. It requires sacrificing sleep, peace of mind, and occasionally, your own physical health. My husband, Julian, and I built our empire from a cramped, unair-conditioned leased desk space into one of the most sought-after architectural firms in the state. To the outside world, Julian and I were the ultimate modern power couple. We represented the new elite, driven and ambitious. We had the sprawling glass-walled house in the hills, the matching luxury cars, and the kind of wealthy, seamless partnership where we finished each other's sentences in high-stakes boardroom pitches. It was a picture-perfect life, meticulously drafted and flawlessly executed, much like the multi-million-dollar blueprints I designed. I genuinely believed we were untouchable, wrapped in a cocoon of mutual respect and shared ambition. But no foundation is entirely crack-proof, especially when the pressure comes from within your own bloodline. The tremors began when my younger sister, Harper, moved to Austin. Harper is 30, but she has spent her entire adult life playing a teenager on the internet. She had been living in Miami, trying to sustain a glamorous, hollow lifestyle as a social media influencer. When the lucrative brand deals dried up and the algorithmic fame evaporated, she was left with nothing but an avalanche of credit card debt and a shattered ego. She arrived on our doorstep with designer luggage she could not actually afford and a tragic, victimized narrative she had rehearsed perfectly. Our parents, Arthur and Eleanor, have babied Harper since the day she was born. In their eyes, she was a fragile, creative spirit who just needed the right environment to thrive, whereas I was the sturdy, dependable workhorse always expected to carry the heavy load. Within days of Harper's arrival, the emotional manipulation began. My mother called me, her voice dripping with that familiar, guilt-inducing sweetness she used to bend me to her will. Avery, your sister is in a very dark place right now. You and Julian have so much. You have this massive, successful company and a beautiful life. It would mean the absolute world to us if you could bring her on board. Just give her a title, something to help her get back on her feet and restore her confidence. They pressured me relentlessly, playing on my duty as the older sister, until I finally caved against my better judgment. We created a pristine, high-paying position for her director of public relations. She had absolutely zero practical corporate experience, no idea how to manage a real crisis, and no business acumen. But to keep the peace in the family, I handed her a lucrative salary, an expense account, and a corner office right down the hall from mine. It did not take long for the atmosphere in the office to shift entirely. At first, the changes were subtle, easily brushed off as my own paranoia. I would notice Julian and Harper whispering intimately by the espresso machine, only to pull apart hastily the moment I walked into the break room. Then came the endless marketing strategy meetings. Julian, who usually loathed dealing with the public relations side of the business, suddenly found it absolutely vital to brainstorm with my sister behind closed doors until midnight. Whenever I questioned the impossibly late hours, Julian would brush it off smoothly, looking me right in the eye with unwavering confidence. She is just eager to learn. Avery, I am trying to get her up to speed so she is not a burden on your design team. You know how much she needs a win right now. I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe that my husband was just being a supportive brother-in-law to my troubled sister. But then I began to notice her wardrobe. Harper abruptly discarded her flashy neon Miami outfits. Instead, she began wearing sleek, tailored suits, silk blouses, and minimalist dresses. They were exactly my style. My signature color palette, but tailored just a fraction too tight, the necklines plunging just a little too low. She was wearing my armor, but weaponizing it. I could smell her heavy, sweet perfume lingering in the passenger seat of Julian's car. I caught the secretive, mocking glances she shot him when she thought I was reading over a contract. I tried to silence the deafening alarm bells ringing in my head. I told myself I was just an exhausted, overworked architect projecting my daily stress onto my family. I rationalized every lingering touch on his shoulder, every hushed inside joke they shared at dinner, and every knowing glance they exchanged across the conference table. I fought to preserve the harmony of my perfect life, but the intuition of a wife is a terrifyingly accurate instrument. Deep in my gut, beneath the heavy layers of denial and familial loyalty, I felt the cold, creeping dread that a fatal fracture was forming right under my own roof. The life I had built, brick by painful brick, was quietly being rigged with explosives, and the people holding the detonator were the two people I trusted most in the world. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon during a high-stakes pitch to a major tech conglomerate. Julian had stepped out of the glass-walled conference room to take what he claimed was an urgent call from a contractor. Leaving his laptop connected to the main projector, the clients were waiting, and I needed to pull up the final set of three-dimensional architectural renderings to keep the momentum going. As I rapidly navigated through his desktop directories, my cursor hovered over a strangely placed folder labeled as archived invoices for the year 2023. Something about its location deep in his personal drive, rather than our shared corporate cloud, felt intensely wrong. Driven by a sudden, sickening jolt of intuition, I double-clicked it. There were no invoices inside. Instead, a massive grid of thumbnail images populated the screen. My breath instantly caught in my throat, choking me. They were photos, intimate, highly explicit photos of my sister, Harper, and they were not taken in some anonymous hotel room. They were taken right there, in my own private office, in one photo. She was draped over my custom leather chair, wearing nothing but the silk scarf I had bought during a trip to Paris. In another, Julian's reflection was clearly visible in the background mirror. Holding the camera, a cold, violent shudder ripped through my spine, paralyzing my limbs. I frantically clicked on a subfolder. It was filled with hundreds of text messages, screen-captured and meticulously saved. I read the words, nauseated and dizzy. They detailed their sickening escapades, mocking me endlessly. They called me oblivious, frigid, and pathetic while I was literally down the hall working 70-hour weeks to fund their lavish lifestyles. But the horror did not stop at infidelity. Beneath that vile gallery lay a series of heavily encrypted legal documents. My hands shook so violently I could barely manipulate the trackpad. When the files finally opened, the floor beneath me seemed to vanish entirely. They were corporate restructuring agreements and equity transfer forms. For the past 4 months, while I was buried under drafting blueprints and managing our expanding design team, Julian and Harper had been secretly consulting with ruthless corporate attorneys. They had meticulously engineered a labyrinth of legal loopholes designed to dilute my founding shares and systematically strip me of my voting rights on the Vanguard Crest Architecture Board. They were not just stealing my marriage. They were actively orchestrating a coup to steal my entire life's work. I do not remember terminating the presentation. I do not remember the agonizing drive back to our sprawling estate in the hills. My vision was tunneled, my mind a deafening siren of disbelief, rage, and agonizing grief. When I burst through the heavy oak front doors, I found them in the kitchen. They were standing intimately by the marble island, casually sharing a bottle of my favorite reserve wine. laughing at something on her phone. I slammed the printed copies of their grotesque messages and the legal documents onto the counter. The heavy thud echoed through the massive room, shattering their domestic illusion. I waited for the panic. I waited for Julian to fall to his knees, for Harper to cry, to feign remorse, or to beg for forgiveness. Instead, the most chilling, surreal scene played out. Harper looked down at the papers, then slowly looked up at me, and she laughed. It was not a nervous, caught-in-the-act giggle. It was a loud, sharp, viciously mocking laugh that echoed in the high ceilings of the kitchen I had paid for. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, looking me up and down with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "Oh, Avery," she sneered, her voice dripping with poison. "Do not act so tragically surprised. Look at you. You are nothing but a tedious, boring workaholic. You care more about concrete stress tests than you ever did about being a real woman or a real wife. Julian is a man who needs passion, and you are just a human calculator. He belongs to me now." I turned to Julian, my chest heaving, waiting for him to defend me, to snap out of whatever spell she had cast, to deny her insane cruelty. But the man looking back at me was a complete stranger. His eyes were flat, calculating, and utterly devoid of humanity. He calmly set his wineglass down on the marble. "She is right, Avery," he said, his voice as cold and precise as a scalpel. "We are done, and before you start threatening me with a vicious divorce or a protracted legal battle, you should read those documents carefully. I already triggered the buyout clauses. I had you sign the initial amendments buried in that massive stack of routine vendor contracts 2 weeks ago. The joint bank accounts are frozen as of 1 hour ago. You have zero access to the corporate funds. You are officially locked out of the firm." He was flawlessly, ruthlessly evicting me from the empire I had built with my own blood and sweat, suffocating from the sheer, crushing magnitude of the betrayal. I ran. I drove frantically across town to my parents' house. I needed my mother. I needed my father to step in, to see the absolute monster their golden child had become, to demand justice for my destroyed life. I burst into their living room, hysterical, sobbing, desperately laying out the undeniable proof of Harper's depravity and Julian's calculated financial crimes. Arthur and Eleanor sat on their pristine floral sofa. They did not gasp. They did not rush to comfort me. Instead, they exchanged a long, tired, knowing glance. It was the exact exasperated look you give a misbehaving child throwing an unreasonable tantrum. My mother sighed heavily, crossing her arms over her chest. "Avery, please stop screaming. You are giving me a terrible headache," she said, her tone utterly dismissive and deeply annoyed. "We already know. Harper came to us months ago when they first fell in love. You have to understand. They are simply a perfect match. You were always too harsh, too masculine, too focused on money and power. Harper has a gentle soul. She needs someone strong to take care of her." The room began to spin violently. The psychological manipulation was so profound, so absolute, I felt like I was drowning in a nightmare. My father chimed in, his voice stern, authoritative, and completely devoid of paternal warmth. "We expect you to handle this with dignity. Avery, retreat quietly. Sign whatever final papers Julian needs and walk away. Do not make a public scandal out of this and ruin your sister's happiness. Besides, Julian and Harper have already promised to secure our financial future. They are moving us into a luxury retirement community next spring. Do not be selfish and ruin this beautiful opportunity for the whole family." The gaslighting was complete. My own flesh and blood had sold me out for a country club membership and a comfortable retirement. They were actively, proudly protecting the predators who had just butchered my life. In that singular, defining moment, the Avery who loved them, the Avery who blindly played the dutiful daughter and the supportive sister, died completely. I stopped crying. The hysterical, burning tears dried up instantly, replaced by a terrifying, hollow silence inside my chest. Stripped of my profound love, my towering career, and my entire family in a matter of hours, I turned around and walked out of their house without speaking another word. I left Austin with absolutely nothing to my name but the clothes on my back and a heart turning rapidly to solid stone. But as I drove past the city limits, I knew they had made one fatal miscalculation. I was not retreating to hide. I was simply stepping back into the shadows to watch them build their fragile glass castle, knowing exactly where to strike when the time came to shatter it. I relocated to Seattle, Washington. I needed a city where the perpetual, stinging rain could wash away the suffocating, sun-baked memories of Texas. The very first thing I did upon landing was march into a mobile provider store, cancel my old plan entirely, and purchase a brand new device with a completely unlisted number. I ruthlessly severed every single digital and physical tie to my past. I blocked their email addresses. I restricted my parents from all communication channels. And I explicitly instructed the security desk of my new apartment building to reject any mail or visitors bearing my family name. The silence that followed was not lonely. It was a profound, cold, and utterly liberating absolute zero. I did not sit in the dark and mourn the empire that was stolen from me. I used that coldness to build a new one. During my years at the old firm, Julian had always been the charismatic face of the operation, but the industry insiders, the elite contractors, and the high-net-worth developers knew exactly whose brain engineered the award-winning structures. I quietly reached out to 3 of my most loyal, deep-pocketed former clients. I laid out my vision, completely devoid of the heavy administrative baggage of my past. Recognizing genuine talent over superficial corporate politics, they backed me without hesitation. Armed with a massive commercial bank loan and their initial retainer fees, I founded Aura Design Group. We did not just compete, we dominated. Within 18 months, Aura was securing towering skyscraper contracts and sprawling civic center projects that made my former company look like a neighborhood treehouse business. It was during the grueling, late-night construction phase of our flagship corporate headquarters project that I met Miles. He was the lead software engineer for the tech firm we were building the campus for. Miles was the absolute antithesis of Julian. Where my ex-husband was loud, flashy, and constantly performing for an audience, Miles was deeply grounded, quiet, and possessed a brilliant, analytical mind. He did not want to compete with my success or leverage it for his own vanity. He simply stood beside me. He brought me hot coffee at 2 a.m. when I was frantically redrafting structural load diagrams, and he listened to my traumas without trying to forcefully fix them or gaslight me into suppressing my anger. Through Miles, I finally learned what it felt like to experience a completely unconditional love, anchored entirely in mutual, unwavering respect. 3 years passed in a blur of immense professional triumph and quiet personal healing. I never searched for my family. But the internet is a loud, unavoidable echo chamber. My sister kept her social media profiles entirely public, desperate for validation. Every few months, an algorithmic suggestion would push one of her tasteless posts onto my feed. I would see her lounging on the deck of a leased yacht or thrusting a grotesque 5-carat diamond ring toward the camera, boasting about her fairy tale life with the man she stole. I never shed a single tear over those images. Instead, I simply smiled, sipping my morning espresso, feeling nothing but a profound, icy contempt. I knew the truth about Julian's business acumen. He was a spectacular salesman, but he had absolutely no idea how to manage complex corporate logistics or sustain long-term architectural innovation. Because I am not someone who relies on karma to balance the scales, I took matters into my own hands. I quietly hired a boutique, highly aggressive firm of forensic financial attorneys based out of New York. I paid them tens of thousands of dollars just to shadow the public tax filings, property acquisitions, and corporate registry updates of Vanguard Crest architecture. I watched from the shadows as they began to bleed out, slowly and steadily, preparing my arsenal for the exact moment the tide would inevitably turn. That moment arrived on a freezing, torrential Tuesday afternoon in Seattle. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, reviewing a 9-figure development contract, when my receptionist buzzed my private line. Her voice was hesitant, laced with genuine concern. She told me there was a man in the lobby who bypassed security, dripping wet, looking completely unhinged, and desperately begging to speak with me. I authorized his entry. When the heavy frosted glass doors slid open, I barely recognized the creature standing in my doorway. Julian was a hollow, pathetic shell of the arrogant titan who had callously thrown me out of my own home. His designer suit was wrinkled and soaked through with cold rain. His face was deeply lined, pale, and carrying the heavy, sagging weight of chronic exhaustion and profound panic. He stood there, shivering, clutching a damp leather briefcase like a lifeline. He collapsed into the visitor chair before I even offered it. Burying his face in his trembling hands, the dam broke immediately. He sobbed, loud, ugly, gasping cries that echoed off my pristine white walls. He confessed everything. Harper, the delicate, fragile soul my parents had sacrificed me to protect, had proven to be a bottomless, parasitic monster. Once she grew bored of playing the wealthy architectural socialite, she set her sights higher. Julian tearfully explained that over the past 14 months, she had been systematically embezzling millions of dollars from the firm's operating accounts. She had secretly funneled the stolen capital into offshore trusts to impress a new lover, an eccentric tech billionaire based in Silicon Valley. She completely abandoned Julian the moment the corporate accounts hit zero, leaving him drowning in catastrophic debt, multiple breached construction contracts, and the imminent, humiliating threat of total bankruptcy. He looked up at me with red, pathetic eyes, begging for salvation. He asked for my forgiveness. He pleaded for a second chance, or at the absolute very least, a senior management position at Aura Design Group so he could afford to stop the bank from foreclosing on the Austin estate. I looked at him, feeling an intoxicating, euphoric wave of dark satisfaction wash over my senses. The schadenfreude was an absolute physical high, but my face remained perfectly composed. I softened my eyes, adopting a gentle, deeply sympathetic expression. I walked over, poured him a glass of premium sparkling water, and sat closely across from him. "Julian," I said, my voice dripping with manufactured warmth and false concern, "I am so incredibly sorry she did this to you. I knew she was troubled, but I never imagined she was capable of something so financially destructive. But if I am going to help you clean up this mess, if I am going to integrate you into my firm, I need to know exactly what we are dealing with. How did she get the money out? You must have set up some protective structures when you restructured the company 3 years ago. Tell me exactly how you two managed the corporate taxes and the equity transfers back then, so my legal team can find a way to shield you now." Desperate for a lifeline and completely blinded by my feigned empathy, he sang like a canary. Sitting in my office, he spent the next 45 minutes detailing every single illegal maneuver he and Harper had executed. He enthusiastically explained the fraudulent shell companies, the inflated vendor invoices they used to hide the embezzled funds, and the massive, deliberate tax evasion schemes they employed to artificially inflate the company's valuation after they forced me out. He gave me names, dates, offshore account routing protocols, and specific dollar amounts. He handed me the very matches to burn his own empire to the ground, all while I sat there nodding encouragingly. What Julian did not know was that the moment he started crying, I had discreetly tapped the bezel of my smartwatch, activating a high-definition, cloud-synced audio recording application. When he finally finished his pathetic confession, he looked utterly relieved, convinced he had just secured his salvation. I stood up, offered him a polite, entirely platonic hug, and told him to go back to his hotel and wait for my call. I watched him walk to the elevator, a sickening spring of false hope returning to his step. The very second the elevator doors closed, the sympathetic mask melted off my face. I walked back to my desk, exported the crystal-clear audio file, attached it to the comprehensive dossier my forensic lawyers had built, and securely transmitted the entire package directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. The hammer fell with brutal, spectacular efficiency. Barely 3 weeks later, Julian was arrested in the lobby of a cheap motel, slapped with federal indictments for massive tax fraud, wire fraud, and corporate embezzlement. Vanguard Crest architecture was immediately seized and liquidated by the federal government to pay off the staggering debts. Julian's entire life was officially reduced to ash. But as I read the news of his indictment, I felt a cold, lingering emptiness. Taking down the pawn was satisfying, but the Queen was still freely walking the board. The true punishment meant for my sister was still waiting in the dark. 2 full years passed since the federal prison doors slammed shut on my ex-husband. The dust of my past had completely settled, replaced by the towering steel and glass monuments my firm was erecting across the Pacific Northwest. I was untouchable, protected by layers of security, unlisted directories, and an ironclad resolve. But desperation is a highly motivated detective. My parents, entirely cut off from the illicit wealth they had been promised and facing the harsh reality of their choices, pooled whatever meager resources they had left to hire a ruthless private investigator. They hunted down my new identity, my private residence, and my heavily encrypted personal cell phone number. The breach happened on a quiet Sunday morning. My phone vibrated with an unknown caller ID from Texas. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, another call, then another. Within 3 hours, there were dozens of desperate, hysterical voice messages clogging my inbox. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping black coffee, and finally pressed play. The sound of my mother weeping aggressively filled the silent room. Her voice was not the haughty, dismissive tone she used when she told me to gracefully accept my destroyed marriage. It was a frantic, primal wail of absolute terror. "Avery, please," she sobbed into the receiver, her voice cracking violently. "You have to call us back. I know you are angry. I know we made mistakes, but you have to put all of that aside. We are facing a devastating, irreversible tragedy. Your sister is dying." I listened to message after message, piecing together the chaotic narrative. Harper's glamorous, stolen life had abruptly ended, not by financial ruin, but by biological mutiny. She had been diagnosed with a remarkably rare and profoundly aggressive form of bone marrow failure. Her body had completely stopped producing healthy blood cells. The high-priced specialists in Austin had delivered a grim ultimatum. Chemotherapy was useless. Experimental drugs were failing. The singular, absolute only way for my sister to survive was an immediate, emergency bone marrow transplant. And because of her incredibly unique genetic markers, finding a donor on the National Registry was a statistical impossibility. She needed a perfect, absolute genetic match. She needed her biological sibling. My father took over the subsequent voicemails, deploying the heavy, suffocating artillery of emotional manipulation. "She is barely breathing on her own, Avery," he pleaded, his voice trembling with manufactured authority. "She is hooked up to machines, fading away every single day. She cries for you. Whatever happened in the past, she is still your flesh and blood. You are the older sister. You are the strong one. You cannot let her die out of spite. Please, find it in your heart to forgive. We are begging you to go to a clinic and get tested. Just take the test." The sheer audacity of their demands was breathtaking. They wanted me to literally carve into my own bones to save the parasite who had gleefully butchered my life. They expected the dutiful, obedient daughter to rise from the grave they had dug for her, all in the name of sacred family bonds they themselves had shredded. I did not reply to their frantic texts. I did not return a single phone call. Instead, I quietly canceled my morning meetings the following Tuesday and drove to the Premier Oncology Research Hospital in downtown Seattle. I walked into the pristine, brightly lit clinic, paid for the expedited genetic testing out of pocket, and allowed the phlebotomist to draw my blood. I was not doing this out of lingering sibling loyalty or a sudden, miraculous surge of Christian forgiveness. I was doing it because I needed to know exactly who held the final card in this twisted game. For 7 days, the silence from my end drove my parents into a state of absolute, frantic delirium. The barrage of messages turned from begging to demanding, then back to agonizing pleas. I ignored every single one. I simply waited for the encrypted email from the Seattle clinic. When the test results finally arrived in my inbox, I sat in my darkened office, staring at the glowing screen. The numbers confirmed what my dark intuition already knew. I was a flawless, 100% match. I was the singular human being on the surface of the earth, possessing the precise biological key to unlock Harper from her death sentence. God, or perhaps the devil, had placed the life of my greatest enemy entirely inside the palm of my hand. I picked up my phone and dialed the Texas number. My mother answered on the first ring, gasping for air. "Mom," I said, my voice incredibly soft, trembling with perfectly acted, tearful surrender. "I got the results. I am a match, a perfect 100% match." A deafening scream of pure, ecstatic relief erupted through the speaker. I could hear my father crying loudly in the background. "Oh, my sweet girl," my mother wailed, her voice dripping with sickening, sudden adoration. "I knew you would not abandon us. I knew you had a pure heart. You are a living saint. Avery, you are saving our family." "I will be on the first flight to Austin tomorrow morning," I whispered smoothly, staring at my reflection in the dark window pane. "Tell the doctors to prep her room. I am coming to give Harper exactly what she deserves." I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the VIP oncology suite at Austin General Hospital. The sterile, biting smell of industrial antiseptic mixed with the sickeningly sweet scent of wilting floral arrangements. I was not dressed for a tragic bedside vigil. I wore a razor-sharp, charcoal gray designer suit, tailored to absolute, intimidating perfection, paired with stiletto heels that clicked rhythmically, ruthlessly against the polished linoleum floor. Every single step I took sounded like the steady ticking of a metronome, counting down the final seconds to an absolute reckoning. Harper lay in the center of a massive, complicated mechanical bed. The glamorous, vibrant internet star who had stolen my life was entirely gone. She was gaunt, her skin a translucent, sickly shade of gray, and she was hooked to a dizzying array of transparent tubes and humming monitors. Beside her stood Arthur and Eleanor, the very moment my presence registered in the room. My parents rushed forward. Their faces were stretched into grotesque, horrifying masks of manufactured relief. My mother reached out, her hands trembling wildly, trying to grab my arms. She was sobbing loudly, loudly praising the heavens, declaring that God had finally answered their prayers, and weeping about how my beautiful, forgiving heart had returned to save our shattered family. I did not embrace them. I did not even offer a comforting smile. I merely stepped to the side, letting my mother's desperate hands grasp empty air, and locked my eyes directly on the attending physician. The lead oncologist was a tall, exhausted-looking man who smiled at me with genuine, profound reverence. "You must be the sister," he said, his voice brimming with professional excitement and immense relief. "You are an absolute miracle. The genetic sequencing we received from the Seattle clinic is completely flawless. You are a 100% match. Your sister's immune system has experienced total failure. Without this specific biological intervention, she would not survive the week. We need to prep you immediately. We must begin the marrow extraction process within the next 24 hours to give her the absolute highest probability of graft success and survival." I listened to his passionate medical speech in absolute silence. I let his urgent words hang in the heavy, sterilized air of the hospital room. I slowly turned my head and looked at Harper. Her hollow, terrified, sunken eyes were fixed on me with a pathetic, desperate glimmer of hope. She genuinely believed she had won. She genuinely believed that the sacred bounds of blood would force me to play the martyr one last time. Slowly, deliberately, making sure every single person in the room was watching my hands, I unclasped the heavy brass lock on my leather briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, matte black folder. It was custom-made, bearing the exact same dimensions, the exact same texture, and the exact same color as the folder Harper had arrogantly tossed onto my kitchen island 5 years ago, when she gleefully announced she was stealing my company and my husband. The room fell dead silent. The frantic beeping of the heart monitor seemed to amplify as I stepped directly toward the bed. I did not hand the folder to the smiling doctor. I dropped it right onto Harper's lap. The heavy, authoritative thud echoed sharply off the pristine white walls. "Go ahead," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, completely devoid of any warmth, anger, or pity. "Open it." Harper's trembling, skeletal fingers fumbled weakly with the cardboard flap. My parents crowded in closely behind her, wiping away their tears of joy, eagerly expecting to see the finalized medical consent forms for the surgical procedure. Instead, they found themselves staring at a thick stack of aggressively highlighted, heavily notarized legal documents. The top page was indeed the laboratory confirmation of my 100% genetic compatibility, but beneath that single piece of medical paper lay the absolute, undeniable hammer of their destruction. They were real estate transfer deeds, banking default notices, and immediate asset seizure warrants. While you were desperately spending your last pennies hiring investigators to hunt me down in Washington, I said, turning my gaze slowly to Arthur and Eleanor, who were now staring at the papers with mounting, suffocating horror. "I did a little forensic digging into your current financial situation. It turns out that when Julian's fraudulent empire collapsed into dust, he took all of your promised luxury retirement funds down with him. You heavily mortgaged your home to pay off Harper's early legal and medical fees before she got too sick. You defaulted on those secondary loans 6 months ago. The bank was quietly preparing to foreclose." I took a single step closer to my parents, watching the blood completely drain from their faces. "You sold me out for a country club membership and a comfortable retirement. So, I used a corporate shell company based out of Delaware to buy all of your toxic debt directly from the bank. I paid a massive premium for it just to secure the rights. As of 8 o'clock this morning, I am your sole, legally binding creditor, and I have officially initiated the immediate foreclosure and eviction process. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the property. You have absolutely nothing. You have no home, no retirement, no savings, and zero leverage." Arthur's face turned violently purple. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Eleanor collapsed heavily against the windowsill, gasping for air as if she were suddenly drowning in the middle of the room. But I was not finished. I turned my attention back to the bed. I leaned over the cold metal rail, bringing my face mere inches from Harper's. I could smell the stale, sour scent of pure, unadulterated terror radiating from her skin. Her eyes were wide, frantic, darting around the room looking for the doctor, looking for our parents, looking for anyone to save her from the monster she had created. "I have the marrow," I whispered, my voice as cold and absolute as a frozen glacier. "I am the singular person on this entire planet who can save your life. I am your only hope, and my answer is no. Enjoy your final days." The reaction was instantly explosive. My mother shrieked, a blood-curdling, deafening scream of pure hatred. She lunged at me, clawing wildly at my expensive suit, cursing my name, calling me a demon, a soulless psychopath, a murderer. I shoved her away with a single, effortless, dismissive motion. My father was loudly shouting for the doctors, threatening to call the police, screaming hysterically that I could not legally do this to my own family. Behind them, the array of advanced medical machines attached to Harper began to shriek violently. Her heart rate monitor exploded into a chaotic, rapid-fire sequence of high-pitched red alarms as her weakened body went into severe, uncontrollable panic and systemic shock. Medical staff began rushing down the hallway toward the door. I did not blink. I did not look back at the chaos. I calmly smoothed out the lapel of my jacket, turned on my heel, and walked straight out of the room. Parting the sea of incoming nurses, I left the deafening chorus of their absolute destruction echoing down the sterile hospital corridor. I walked out into the sweltering Texas heat, hailed a private car, and headed straight to the airport. I caught the earliest direct flight back to Seattle. When I finally landed, the torrential Pacific rain had cleared. Miles was waiting for me at the arrivals terminal. Standing tall and steady, He did not ask any probing questions. He saw the quiet resolution in my eyes and simply wrapped his strong arms around me. I rested my head against his broad shoulder, feeling the steady, calming rhythm of his heartbeat. I looked out through the massive glass windows of the terminal at the brilliant, perfectly clear blue sky. The ledger was officially balanced. The toxic ghosts of my past were permanently buried, and I was finally free to live the rest of my brilliant, untouchable life. Thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for listening to today's story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let us know your city or country in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey of betrayal and ultimate justice, we kindly ask for your help. Please consider supporting our channel with just $1. You can donate by scanning the QR code on your screen, or by clicking the donation link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Your generous contribution allows us to pay our incredibly hardworking staff, helping them feed their families and keeping this channel alive so we can continue creating the stories you love. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next video.